All the goth DJs and Twitch witches are hanging out on Thursday for the bad VHS rips, unblinking eyes, and fire by night. Thetans and Satans comes from an interest in the cult of Scientology, moral panics, Satanism, and how they set the tone for the extremist social media panics of today. We really earn our Weird Left Twitch badge with this show, watching the world go red light in reverse every Thursday at 9 p.m. Pacific on twitch.tv/echoplexmedia. Find our full schedule at echoplexmedia.com.
Hey everyone, usually when I conduct an interview, there's like a part where I'm like, okay, hold on, let's leave a little bit of silence and I will start the interview proper. In this case, the call connected and we just started chatting. I think it was for the best. The conversation flowed really well, and maybe we'll just pick it up right here.
So,
yeah, well, I mean, we all have an unhealthy relationship with ourselves sometimes. I mean, otherwise, what are we doing spending all this time on Twitter? Like, if we were had healthy relationships with ourselves, what would we be doing on Twitter? The amount of I mean, really.
that's fair. Although I take consolation when I look at people like Jordan Peterson. I'm kind of like, well, I manage my Twitter habits quite well, relatively speaking.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that I think that celebrity really fucks some people up, you know?
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, I couldn't imagine, like, if I had that kind of following, what it would do to my ego, you know? Like,
yeah, although, Matt and I have talked about, and with other people as well, about whether whether the ingredients, of course, becoming famous and stuff, has a big impact, but a lot of those people, and in particular, like Brett and Jordan, seems like they were waiting their whole life for everyone else to discover how incredible and insightful they were. So, I kind of feel like they've been definitely broken by the attention, but it wasn't an accident that they, stepped out into the limelight and ended up on Tucker Carlson or, in these viral moments. So, yeah, I think I previously had thought of them as a little bit kind of deers in the headlight who, got sucked into things, but I've subsequently revised it to, oh no, these were guys that were angling for this their whole lives.
Well, I feel like we've already kind of jumped into the conversation, so maybe this is the part where I ask you to introduce yourself and tell my audience, maybe if they don't know who you are, and how you came to be doing a podcast that gets oftentimes treated as if it's my podcast when people talk about how mean you are.
Yeah, so if people don't know who I am, it just means they're slightly better adjusted, but I feel like if they know who you are, they probably know me as well. But I'm a co-host on Decoding the Gurus with I'm an academic and I teach in a psychology department, but I'm in the hinterlands between anthropology and psychology, and I do the podcast with another psychologist, Matthew Brown, in Australia, and we look at the cast of characters, maybe mostly around the IDW kind of space, but we try to cast the net further afield, and at the minute we're doing a season around kind of tech gurus, and what we do is probably similar to what I've seen on the intellectual dollar tree in a way. We play clips from the content and then comment on it, and we try to critically analyze what they're doing and look at the the rhetoric they use. But we don't just cover people that we dislike or that we find annoying. They do take up the lion's share, but we've covered Carl Sagan and Anthony DeMello, ContraPoints we like, Rutger Bregman and stuff. So we do try to kind of basically include anybody that might be counted as a modern day guru, for better or worse. And yeah, we've been doing it for about a year now and are still are still enjoying it despite the scheduling conflicts that I was just complaining about. But yeah, so that's mostly what we do. And I'm originally from Northern Ireland, which is why I sound like this. But I now live in Japan, which probably hasn't had that much influence on my accent, except I speak slower.
I did want to kind of ask what that's been like for you. I don't think I've heard you talk about that much, like on your podcast or interviews. I've heard, like, how did it come to be that you are in Japan?
Yeah, so one, my wife is Japanese, so that plays a part, but that's not actually why I'm here. My research during my PhD ended up being about ritual psychology, and I was interested in Japan and the kind of ritual and religious environment here, because it's this kind of interesting place where there's lots of rituals and there's kind of relatively vibrant religious system alone, but not a very strong commitment to particular beliefs or even to given denominations. So if you're interested in ritual psychology, it's a pretty good place to come to look for people doing rituals without having very strongly attached beliefs. And that's a slightly unusual combination, but maybe a lot more common in East Asia. So I came over to Japan as part of my PhD research, and then was supposed to stay for just a while, but continued doing the research, getting extensions to funding, and getting kind of more settled in Japan. And now I've been here 8 years, I guess. So pretty settled here now. And and after I finished my PhD, I ended up getting a position at a Japanese university. So I've got like a dual position I'm a researcher at Oxford, and I teach in a Japanese university in Tokyo.
That's a wild story. That's cool. Like, most people don't ever like live even 50 miles away from where they grew up. So that's definitely
yeah. So I think when up till like I was 18, I basically hadn't spent much time anywhere outside of Northern Ireland except on holiday. So I was quite eager at 18 to like go somewhere else, and I ended up in London for university, and then eventually in Oxford to do the PhD. But as soon as there was an opportunity to go further afield, and I always had an interest in Japan. I studied Japanese a bit at university. So yeah, it was like a personal interest, but also research motivated.
Well, that's pretty cool. How's your Japanese?
It's okay. It's getting better because I've recently like living in Japan. Of course, you've got like lots of opportunity, every day to hear Japanese, but like my daily routine is like very like regimented around work, taking kids to things, and getting stuff ready for the next day and so on. So like there's not a ton of time in that for deep conversation with people. It's just like at the convenience or at the supermarket or that kind of thing. But I didn't have time for like attending classes because I've got 2 young kids. But I've recently discovered these apps where you can schedule like online conversations and just like 30 minutes whenever you have the time. So for the past I guess a month now, I've just been using that to get like daily conversation practice. It's just so nice. I get to have my Japanese was okay, but the problem was not getting lots of like conversation practice. So I've now seemingly find a way to do that, and it's yeah. But that's that's not interesting for anyone but me. But my Japanese is fine for like living in Japan and getting around. But I'm happy that I have found this way to have random conversations.
I wonder what people in Japan think of a Northern Irish accent on the Japanese language, because I just imagine that your accent plays out like in your speaking of Japanese, and I just wonder what people in Japan think of that.
It probably does, but I don't think they can hear it that clearly. Like I think to Japanese people, I probably sound like generic English accented Japanese person, or Japanese speaker. So yeah. Because people generally don't even in English often hear my accent very strongly, like when we're communicating in English. So English speakers do notice my accent. But I can't judge. So it is possible that the Northern Irish pronunciation is like sneaking in. But Japanese, the way the language is structured, it's not so bad for the Northern Irish thing, because the way like the consonants and the vowels are combined, it's kind of compatible. So maybe that helps a little bit.
So yeah, that was just stuff I was curious about, like on a personal level. Maybe we can kind of get into the reason I'm talking to you.
Yeah, sorry.
No. That was no. I'm the one conducting the interview. If we're off track, it's clearly my fault. But I wanted to ask, like, I've heard you say in the past that you are yourself heterodox or interested in heterodoxy, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, I feel sort of allergic to saying I'm interested in heterodoxy, given what that brand has come to mean. But I think that when I'm talking about that, I basically mean I have some sympathy for the people who find, like all of the daily or weekly woke outrage kind of porn that the IDW and Dave Rubin types go gaga over. I think that's like, a lot of it is manufactured, a lot of it is Tucker Carlson like whipping up whatever is happening. But I do think there's something to there being like overreaction or like a kind of puritanical streak to some of the stuff in the progressive left space, and I don't like that because I'm a pretty like moderate left person. So there's part of it that's just like that's my political alignment, but the other part is my personality is probably I'm not. I just that vibe doesn't sit well with me, and I encountered that long before the kind of IDW style culture wars. The university I went to in London was the School of Oriental and African Studies. It's got a wild name, but it's the most left wing university in the UK. Like Jeremy Corbyn went there to give his first speech on the steps outside of it. So it's that kind of place. And I was studying anthropology there, right, which is a quite left-leaning topic in academia. And there was already a lot of people in my field, in my class, who took, quite strong stances on cultural relativism and that kind of thing. And I find myself like not in alignment with them. So I actually left social anthropology to go into cognitive anthropology because I wanted like more quantitative and like more rigorous approaches to thing. And I'm relatively critical of some of the postmodern approaches in scholarship and academia. So in that respect, I have like, I think I'd be close to, you know, like the original SoCal hoax, that kind of criticism of like fashionable nonsense, but not the James Lindsay variety. So, you know, somewhere in there.
Well, I mean, when the James Lindsay thing came out, I actually put something on our blog, which I now call the Defamation Times. But I mean, I looked at it, and it was, you know, what happened with the James Lindsay thing is they ended up, they tried to put it in some reputable publication. They got rejected, and they ended up putting it in a pay-to-play publication. And funny enough, they never paid to play. They never paid the $600. And
this is the penis one, right?
Yeah, the conceptual penis. And yeah, that was bad. And it
was bad.
My point with that was like, you know, you could write something jargony even for like, you know, one of the things I know a lot about is audio production. So you could write like a fake audio production thing that's real jargony that you could get past some editor somewhere at a pay-to-play journal, if there was such a journal, right? Because they just wouldn't understand the jargon, and they just want your $800 or whatever it is. And that's sort of what they did with that. They didn't really hoax, like, you know, a reputable journal. You can get something published I could get something published probably if I paid for it, even if it was like just a steaming pile of crap.
Yeah. So the conceptual penis hoax, so-called hoax, was like incredibly confused and not what it claimed to be, because like you say, they submitted it to a pay-to-play journal which has no barrier to entry, and then James Lindsay on this other podcast, Very Bad Wizards, they kind of put that to him, saying, you know, you can't use this as a indictment of the lax publication standards if you're using like pay-to-play journals, which everybody already acknowledges have crap standards. And he tried to argue that like it was also a critique of the pay-to-play publishing industry, but like it didn't really make any sense at the time. But I think, you know, they're called the SoCal Squared hoax because of the original, like they're riffing on Alan Sokal's like a hoax of the Social Text journal. And I think his hoax originally had a lot more thought behind it and had a kind of better point of critique. Lindsay and Pluckrose and Bogosian's like subsequent attempt to, you know, hoax actual journals, I think like that's a good example, because I think they really overstated what they achieved, right? Like, because they did get things through peer review and in some journals that like are, none of the journals were like super influential, but there were some that like within a niche field were considered reasonable. But like the notion that you can get articles of questionable quality published in journals if you don't aim particularly high, and if you're willing to invent data or adjust things to appeal to like prevalent ideological standards, that applies across the spectrum, and it happens every week in almost every field, right? So like there was so much that they didn't do, but they didn't demonstrate that this wasn't the case in like other fields, right? That they would regard as respectable, like evolutionary psychology fields and so on. And they also didn't demonstrate that the 1 a.m. brain has gone past. So anyway, the things that they claimed, it didn't do what they said it did. But I think there was a little bit of a point that you can get things through peer review by like appealing to popular ideological trends and fads, and you can but all academics know that. Oh yeah, I remember what it was now. They didn't have any experience about, like, none of them have ever run an experiment, so they got done, right, because they didn't have ethics clearance, and this was regarded as a like something which needed ethics clearance because you were using human subjects, like the editors, and they regarded this as like this woke way to try and like catch them. And it was incredibly obvious to anybody who's run research that no, if you're going to do that and you're at a university, you're immediately going to need an IRB for that. And I
haven't done any of this kind of stuff, and I can imagine it doesn't seem crazy at all to me that there would be some ethics concerns if you're using human subjects. There would be some bar that you have to clear to like demonstrate that you're doing that ethically. Like it seems obvious.
So the stupid thing they did was they thought because they're not like running, like a classic experiment, they aren't getting people in the lab or they aren't sending out a survey, that they don't need ethics approval. But there's these type of studies that are relatively popular where people send out fake resumes, right? Or and look at the response rates or the offers for interviews. And when you do that, you need to get ethics clearance. You have to say what you're planning to do, how you're going to treat the anonymity of the people, who you're hoaxing and so on. And the stupid thing for me was that if they presented it as a journalistic expose of, the woke academic industry, it would have been fine, because in journalistic standards, you can do that, right? You can write a feature about you did this thing. But the reason Peter Boghossian got like slapped on the wrist, and all it was a slap on the wrist, was because they presented it like a study. If you look on their page, they put up, study materials, and they had methods, results, analysis, and they referred to it as a study. And so they kind of like, they could have avoided all of that by like, one, not involving Peter directly, and two, just claiming it as as a journalistic expose, but they didn't. And you saw them on the camera being informed that like they're saying it's an ethics violation, and they were laughing about it, saying, how could it be? And it's like, you guys, you're not being targeted. You're like, these are the same standards that just responsible people in universities have to deal with, and they just hadn't even considered them.
Well, yeah, if you're going to say that there's no standards in academia, and then you're going to just like ignore the standards that you have to like go through or whatever to publish something, then it sort of takes the wind out of your sails a little bit. It makes it hard for you to on one hand you're saying, oh, there's no standards, and on the other hand, oh, this standard is being used to stifle my paper or whatever. It seems sort of like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Yeah. So there's maybe a good example that also relates to the question you asked about, why I might accept the label of heterodox at times is, so I seen Boghossian released a stupid video recently where he went to some campus and he did a stunt where he put up a sign, something about, some transgender phrase, like a convince me, Stephen Crowder kind of thing. And then he laid out these like little white lines, and he was asking people
we watched that. I was probably like 4 cocktails in when we watched that. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't need to describe to you, but it was a kind of like a provocative stunt, right? Because he went to a campus and did it, and then the kind of some staff, I think, and some academic or some students came down to engage with him, right? And I felt like, I'm backseat driving for the people that interacted with him, but I felt like a bunch of what they said in response to him was like counterproductive and just fed his narrative, because they said, for example, some people saw the sign and felt unsafe and had to go home. And I was like, don't say that, because that's just, that's gonna feed him. Like, if you want to engage him, if you're gonna come down and talk to him, you should talk to him about, why, given your whole thing about free speech and stuff, why are you off in Hungary promoting Orban's regime, right? Forget about all the like woke transgender stuff you say that you want to talk about. Like, let's talk about your commitment to free speech. But I know they don't know Boghossian,
right?
But I feel like they're, by coming down and kind of using the social justice-y buzzwords. They basically give him the meat that he can give to his audience, and I'm kind of like, I wish you wouldn't.
So my like larger criticism of that style of what's going on is that he's media trained, right? And the students that walk up to him, not only are they not media trained, they're also like 19, right?
Yeah.
And 19 is a perfectly fine thing to be. I had some times, right? You probably had some times. But these people, they're undergrads, you know, your brain isn't even done developing. Not media trained, and they woke up this morning and had no idea they were going to talk to Peter Boghossian. And they had no idea who, some of them probably didn't even know who Peter Boghossian was. And I just feel like if somebody, you know, who wants to claim to be like a public intellectual or whatever, wants to have discussions with people they disagree with, they should maybe choose people who have finished college, have media training, and know that they're going to have the discussion ahead of time so that they can prepare a little bit versus the Steven Crowder, like ambush a teenager. Tactic.
I'm completely with you there, but I guess and I do give a lot of laity to like young students, right? Like, you know, lots of people say stupid stuff when they're young students, and like including myself. But the I think that I do still find some of the like kind of tropes that are trotted out, which are caricatured on the right. Like, so it surprises me when people actually use them in real life as like an effective argument. And I wonder in those occasions, is it that like American university, or, you know, the debate in America is like that, and I just don't see it in Japan or the UK? Or is it just that this is like a very specific thing that happens, you know, on very specific campuses and edited videos? Like, I can't tell because I'm not in the US, and I see the hyperventilating from the IDW people, and I see on the like social justice progressive side the claim that like no one says that ever, and it feels like the truth is maybe like not at the IDW extreme, and not at the thing that nobody says, the like kind of extreme woke position.
Well, I mean, if you have Twitter, so you know that whatever it is, somebody somewhere is saying it. Like, you know,
that's true. I do know that. So that's the question. But like, I know that there are positions, you know, that are you'll encounter on Twitter, but you'll never basically bump into them in your daily life for most people. And is it like that, or is it more that this is like, no, this is something that, you know, you will encounter in your workplace or to some extent, and that I don't know that. So you had said that some of the faculty came down and talked to him, and there was a couple videos where he did the thing with the lines, right? It wasn't just one. Yeah.
And I didn't see anybody who I think was faculty who talked to him and I think I watched more than one of them. There was one where they were up on the roof, like shouting at him at some point, and then they came down, and he was like kind of in a quad, and I don't know if it was, they might not have been faculty, like academic faculty, but I thought they were like the kind of, you know, bureaucratic admin maybe
staff.
Yeah, I maybe, and again, he's been doing like a bunch of those videos lately, so I don't think I've watched all of them, and so maybe it's just a different one.
You're missing out. This is, you know, it's such a fantastic genre. I didn't know. I mean, I genuinely, I think I hate Peter Boghossian. Like, I just find him a despicable person. But like that, you know, you must have the same reaction when you see people interact with like conspiracy theorists sometimes, right? And they give them what they need, and you're like, don't do that. Don't, you know. I
mean, and I kind of have the same reaction. Some of the stuff the students were saying, where I was like, oh, you know, I probably said it like during the stream. You know, I don't put everything that I do out. Where, you know, we're up late, we're kind of having fun. I'm there for the chat, and it's like a different environment. Like, I definitely like rein it in for the podcast for the IDT
Yeah.
podcast. I'm like oftentimes like begging my chat to stop saying stupid shit, like because it goes up on my screen. Like because the after show and like the other shows are a little more like way looser. But I didn't put that out, but I certainly understand that those students to some extent were feeding into some of the tropes. But I just think about like, myself when I was 19 or 20 and like how I kind of viewed politics and like how I thought about the world. And I just, my analysis of the world just wasn't like fully formed. And I definitely thought in a lot of tropes and a lot of like oversimplifications, and, I hadn't been out in the world. Like I just remember when I was 19, like there was still like massive discrimination against gay people in this country. So I was like way more focused on that as like a gay man. And so I just feel like, it's, the world is like a different place for a 19-year-old than it is for a 55 or 60. I don't know how old that guy is. And I just think that like, it boggles my mind that this is like sort of what kind of substitutes for debate for some people.
No, that whole space has this like, platonic ideal about like the purity of debate, right? And this like kind of view that the people are too afraid to engage in the free exchange of ideas and the forthright, debate and all this. But like a lot of what they do when you look, especially at the people who use that rhetoric a lot, is like, they just sit and have indulgent conversations with people who are very nice to them, and they avoid confrontational interviews with people who are like on their level with the James Lindsay never did that. He did like 2 or 3 harsh interviews in his entire time, and then he ran away from all the other ones, but they present themselves as these brave like truth tellers or philosophical people. And Peter Boghossian and like James Lindsay and all that, I feel like Lindsay is mask off now. He's a complete like partisan MAGA conspiracy theorist.
I would go a little bit further and just say that his bigotry is just like on full display for everyone to see. I think that sometimes some of the people in our space are reluctant to just call that what it is. I think
it's bigotry,
and I think that's maybe something that I would ask maybe that some people I would ask that some, especially like straight white guys in our space, like do a better job of, is instead of like referring to Lindsay as a partisan, like a right-wing partisan, to like be this guy. He clearly does not like queer people. He clearly thinks black people are inferior. Like these kinds of things are like really harmful to our society. And I think a lot of times, and I think you and Matt not being in America aren't seeing, this isn't playing out in your country. Our culture war spills out over onto your shit. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. Like the culture war online is the American culture war, no matter where you live. And that's unfortunate because our shit is all fucked up right now. And I'm sorry to have exported that to Japan and Australia for you and Matt. But I do think sometimes that, and I think that, I think when you spoke with Ina, she kind of touched on this too. I think that sometimes some of the straight white, like academic types are sort of reluctant to call some of this stuff what it is.
With Lindsay, I don't.
No, you call him Egypt all the time too. I like that.
Yeah, like Lindsay, I think like I say, he's pretty mask off, and like to me, partisan right wing in the American context now is like openly bigoted. And like even if you took it at like just the level of like political strategy, the political strategy of the Republican Party is to suppress the vote of minority groups, right? And all this vaunted thing about the big shift, towards Trump amongst the like Latino community and so on. Like it's still, when you look at the actual relative numbers, like the Democrats are still much more popular amongst like minority groups, and the changes, like pollsters and or political strategists and stuff, they're talking about like the relative change, but the numbers are still like hugely in their favor. But in any case, I know that's not what you're highlighting. So in regards to the American culture war, like I think, like you say, it just consumes everything online, and I think Matt and I have a bit of a resistance to, and other people online as well, not necessarily to the complaint that like, well, you are middle-aged like white guys, because like we are.
Well, I mean, I'm a middle-aged white guy too. It just so happens that I'm gay. It's not like we don't share some of the same buckets. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is true. But like, I'm completely open to that criticism. But I think one part that we would push back on, and I would push back on, is that like I feel sometimes that there isn't an appreciation that like the circumstances that exist in the US and the concerns of people in the US are not universal, and that like people might have had very different experiences in their white countries, right? Like I don't think growing up in Northern Ireland is like growing up in a lot of other places, even in Western Europe. Like the stuff that was different there, and I don't mean that as like, oh, and therefore I can say whatever I want.
Oh no, I mean, I know you're the age you grew up during, what we unfortunately have decided to call the Troubles instead of describing it more explicitly as the Troubles. Sounds like, oh, I got lost on my way to the store. You know what I'm saying? The Troubles, like,
yeah,
it's a funny way to talk about it. It's very British actually to call it the Troubles.
It is, or but I think that's an Northern Irish thing as well. Is like, that's the word that we use in Northern Ireland, and there's a very prevalent dark humor around the Troubles, and there always was, like during the Troubles as well. And like, it's so, like, for example, there, I think there's a very high tolerance for joking about tragic situations. I know that is the case in some places in America as well. There, but there are also people that are very hypersensitive about like joking about certain topics, and
doesn't that depend who you are and like what the payload of the joke is?
It does, but I think that can be a cultural difference as well. Like there's sensitivities, but there's also like broad cultural differences and in tolerance to like things to joke about. And I guess that in some occasions, and this feels a little bit unfair, but when Americans are like kind of talking, it sometimes feels like talking down to you about, you just haven't fought these things about like the social justice issues enough, and and kind of discussing it. And from my point of view, the American country has like guns everywhere, right? And we
have all of them, actually.
Yeah,
nobody else is even allowed to have them.
Almost all of the other, like, Western democracies or whatever had this thing where somebody gets shot in the school, and there's legislation passed and guns were removed. Happened in the UK, happened in Australia, and so it sometimes feels like, look, we have social welfare systems. We have, like, not perfect, but like when I grew up in Northern Ireland as well, we have the NHS, right? So like my conception of medicine was like, medicine is free for everyone. And I know that, as I've traveled around the world or whatever, I know that's not the case everywhere, but it means that like there is a certain like grading about when people are, you know, like lecturing you about how to be a better and more responsible person when your country or the places that you grew up, we have socialized healthcare. We have, you know, like we don't allow guns. And I'm not saying that all Americans are to blame for that, because I know that lots of Americans don't want guns and they want socialized healthcare.
Yeah, and that's why some of us are so fucking mad all the time, honestly, is because we see like what our European, Australian, and even Japanese like counterparts, like what their societies are like, and it's like, well, you know, it's not like you don't have freedom in these places. People have, you know, possibly more freedom in these places, and they also don't have massacres, and like it's also not going to bankrupt you if you have a medical emergency. And so like I do think that like that's you know, a lot of American leftists are mad because like we want those things, and we feel like, you know, as just human beings on the planet, we're entitled to healthcare.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess like part of the frustration from like someone like my perspective is like the country that I come from, or the like kind of background, is that, you know, if I'm a center left person in an American context, I'm actually like, you know, pretty far left, because I'm not afraid of the word socialist, like, and I'm not afraid of like socialized healthcare or any of those things. These are all like common sense assumptions for me. But that means that like when American progressives, for example, kind of, you know, I don't mind when people like, if they want to like criticize you for being right wing or whatever, you know, it's fine. Everybody has their own political compass. So for some people, maybe they can like categorize you there. But it does feel like, you know, in the UK, the like politics are, even though the Conservatives and so on are terrible and are what they are, that like saying, well, you're not like really properly left unless you're on board with like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And it's like, like there's lots of other left-wing political parties throughout the world, and you can be left-wing without adhering to like all of the things that are tied in with the American progressive left. That's like my frustration. So I know I'm harping on that, but
that's okay. This is like where we kind of have kind of clashed a little bit, and it's fine. Like I wouldn't have this conversation with you if I didn't like you and think that, you know, that you know, that we I think we mostly like agree about this stuff. It's just that because I live in a country where like I would do anything to replace like the Republican Party with the Tories, right?
Yeah, which is
people talk a lot of shit on Boris Johnson. Yeah, people talk a lot of shit on Boris Johnson, but we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, all right? Like,
yeah,
like we have like completely batshit people in the government here, and so like I just, you know, I think that's why like sometimes, you know, I think like just people on the American left, especially like queer people and people of color, like we might seem pissed off to people from outside of the country, and we might sometimes even seem like we're unreasonably pissed off, but like the you know, we exist in the circumstances we exist in, and some of us are just kind of sick of it, and like it's hard to, I think it's hard to like talk about some of this stuff without getting angry, you know?
Yeah, I think the frustration, like from my perspective, would be not so much towards like the black community or the queer community, but like the progressive white community, like highly college educated. And I know that the IDW harp on that as well, right? But I think there is a real sector of that, which is, you know, like in the commentary on Twitter, and it is like kind of.
You mean to tell me that some people in my tribe are annoying? Is that what you're saying?
It's possibly, but you know, I know that the moderate left people are equally as annoying, or
it's just that some people are some people are annoying, I think, and it kind of runs the gamut. I don't think that there's any sort of political tribe without its incredibly annoying people. That would be amazing if we could create such a thing, but everybody's annoyed by somebody, you know.
I guess, like, look, I'm an academic elite, right? Like,
I didn't know that about you until I actually took a closer look. You are actually an academic elite.
I'm not like, I'm not saying that in a boastful way, but a shameful way. But like, I mean, like, I can't deny being a part of that group because I've been in academia for too long for it to escape me. But I do know, as a result of that, like, I mean, because of my background, like Irish Catholic in Northern Ireland, I think I told my parents when I was like 15 or whatever, the one thing I'll never do is like live in England, and then I went to university there. Then I went to Oxford, right? Eventually,
that is the most England thing you could do, actually.
It is, and Oxford's a very weird place. Like, if you go there, it's like when you start the university year, there's a thing called a matriculation, where you dress up, in the fancy gown and bow tie and whatnot to start the year.
Post pictures of that on your Twitter. I think people would love that.
Well, so the thing is, when back in the era when this was, Facebook was the dominant thing, and of course people took pictures and stuff when we were there. And my family, because just because we're not familiar with that, we're like, "Oh, Christopher graduated already, congratulations." I was like, no, they just made me wear this. Yeah, and like I remember at that event at the college, I heard someone like in my college, because the Oxford system is really weird. It's got like all these like individualized little colleges, like separate, like there's a university, but it's actually all these individual colleges that people join. And in any case, like when they were doing that ceremony, I had a guy, like a very upper class English guy, in front of me, bemoaning the fact that people had, like the bow ties that you clip on, like, and I had one, right? And he was talking about the kind of lost art of, tying a bow tie, and I remember feeling like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, and so
that is some incredibly posh shit right there. Honestly,
it is, and like that exists in Oxford, and I'm giving that anecdote to say that, like, I had a very negative reaction. It actually took me quite a while to accommodate to like the anti-elite thing, which I had from my upbringing. Right, I just didn't like it. I didn't like the pomp and circumstance, and I didn't like upper class English people. And then but from being in those environments and like around academics and stuff, there is elitism in academia, and there is like a kind of righteous, like tied to people stating progressive, like liberal values, but what they do interpersonally, or what their actual life is like, is extremely elitist and like kind of hypocritical for them to lecture people about how you should be, like so that part, I get why that grates on people, because it grated on me in that environment. I'm still part of those environments, so like I think that thing about people getting annoyed with academics looking down on people, it exists for a reason, because it is a thing that happens in academia. And like I'm basically saying that academics are not blameless for some of the things that they get criticized for about being elitist. And I see it on Twitter with a bunch of academics. But on the other hand, Jeffrey Miller and Sam Harris and so on, like these are also real people. And the notion that is the much more important thing, like elitist liberal professors versus Trump being the president, Stephen Miller organizing the immigration, like there being no social health care in America, that also seems to be widely out of step. So like I think I'm just kind of annoyed with everything. That's like kind of the state I'm in.
Well, that's I think that's sort of where we agree, is that we're basically annoyed with everything. And not for nothing, Sam Harris, it's not like he's not elite. You know what I'm saying?
No, he's Golden Girls money, right?
And not just that. I mean, if you know, if that was all of a sudden taken away from him, it's not like he's like all alms for the poor on Santa Monica Boulevard or whatever, you know. He's pulling in a lot of money from subscriptions, and he does his own style of elitism where he'll just kind of accuse people who he doesn't like of bad faith and then sort of try to shut them out of the conversation. Though he does it less. I was shocked that he talked to you. I wasn't shocked that he talked to Ezra Klein because I thought he was going to absolutely demolish Ezra Klein. I think he thought Ezra was stupid, honestly.
Yeah. He thought he was like a woke ideologue.
Right, and it turned out that Ezra just kind of knows his shit and did like a very good job with Sam.
Yeah.
But he's better than the other ones, like, but still he'll, you know, they're all like deathly afraid of Sam Cedar for some reason. Like none of them will talk to Sam Cedar. And they have this impression of him that he's one thing, but then you go listen to his podcast and every day he's like interviewing an academic, a historian, a journalist. You know, he's like a serious person. He just also happens to be funny. And I think that's their kryptonite is they're like, oh, this guy's funny. I do not want to talk to anybody funny.
There's like a epidemic of people taking themselves too seriously, and like, you know, I listen to, you know, the Intellectual Dollar Tree, and I think you guys do a good job of pointing out when people are like doing that. So it's like, I think Matt and I try to do it too, like that, puncturing the kind of air of self-importance is it can't be done enough in the current environment, like, because everybody's taking themselves deadly seriously, and I think a lot of the times, you know, what they're talking about is like, even if they were right, it's a very minor topic. Like Jordan Peterson, just every day, you know, he's self-banned himself, Twitter. So that's good.
He quit Twitter and then he like an order of magnitude more unhinged after he quit.
Yeah, but what he's raging about, right? It's like, it's just whatever Justin Trudeau had for lunch that day, or, you know, just like every story from Ben Shapiro or Mike Cernovich or whatever, he's leaping on it. And you know, Sam, I was surprised that Sam talked to us as well, although that was a lot to do with Dave Pizarro recommending us, and Sam respects Dave from the Very Bad Wizards. But
they have a good show. I mean, I could see people respecting them. Yes.
I think, I don't know if he respects his judgment after the episode he recorded with us, but yeah, like in that conversation I had with Sam, I actually expected that he would moderate some of his positions, right? Because, like, as you and Ina have pointed out, you know, to some extent, we are probably a sympathetic audience for him, right? We will not be as mean to him as like Ina would be, for example. So if he were to walk back some of the claims, like if for example, I gave him the opportunity, I said, you know, you said there's a 50-50 chance of a civil war in France within 10 years because of the Muslim immigration. Like, you know, in hindsight, do you not think that was, you know, a bit hyperbolic and potentially, you know, like part of a anti-Muslim like panic at the time? And, you know, his response was like, no. I think, you know, he kind of said reasonable people had similar projections that I had, and that and so on. But he basically didn't take any position like moderate it, most of his like more extreme positions. And I was genuinely, I thought that he would, you know, say, well, yes, I overstated that then, and maybe I could have phrased it, you know, more carefully. But he was not like that. He was just like, like, that's that. Yeah, using yours population statistics, it's an entirely reasonable thing to do.
So one thing I learned from that is that you're more patient than I thought you were. I thought you were more like me, because I would have lost my shit. Like, I don't want to spend too much time talking about your conversation with someone else, because I think we're getting kind of to the end of our time here. Mostly because I don't like to do these 3-hour long conversations, and I know you'd like to get to bed because it's late where you're at. but I did. Yeah, I would have lost my shit if I talk to somebody and they monologue, and like when I ask them a question, they just give a speech. I just lose my patience with them, and I will start talking shit. I don't care who it is. If somebody tries to do that, like especially because they've come onto my show, I feel like it's like disrespectful of my time and my relatively small but real audience. And I was surprised with your patience with that. But I know that you also you didn't want to blow the conversation. And I would have been perfectly happy to blow that conversation.
Well, it was, so there's two things. There's one, I owe you an apology because I've probably done that. I'm a very long-winded person. No,
but I mean, I'm not asking, you haven't done that when I've told you the things, like on the few things where I've said, well, here's where I disagree with you. You haven't done that at all. When I asked you to tell me about yourself, you were long-winded, but that's fine. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference there.
Yeah. So, but I still apologize. I've got the academic disease. It's just waffling. This is why the sense makers like me. But the like with Sam, I didn't mind having like confrontational. I actually had a whole bunch of like a list of questions and stuff prepared, and I'd listened to a whole thing. I'd listened to Ina's conversations and stuff in preparation. I'd listened to a whole bunch of things and made notes, and then Sam did what you said, which is like he kind of filibustered often with points that I wasn't making, and that time was probably the first time where we had that experience, right? Of like we invited someone and they didn't really engage in the turn taking, and they kind of cut you off in the middle of questions, and it was slightly eye opening because it was like we had invited Sam, and then we knew we were going to have like a contentious discussion for the second half of it, but we hadn't factored into that like, okay, so the dynamic is that we're hosting him, but I'm kind of debating him, but as a host, you should kind of let the guest speak, and in the debate, you could be like, no, excuse me, right? Like, so when Ezra Klein was talking to Sam, he sometimes just said, no, look, you've talked for 5 minutes, now it's my turn, right? And I had a similar sensation to that, but I was kind of like, and at the end, you can hear me getting, more frustrated and cutting in more often than that, but it was because of that weird, like,
and in the moment, like you said, you had not, in the context of your podcast, had a contentious conversation like that with somebody. The first time that ever happened to me was this guy named Jim Lee, who pretends to be an atmospheric scientist because he believes in chemtrails. And I wasn't prepared for it either. I had seen his shows and like kind of knew like what he was going to say, but I wasn't really ready for the way he was going to approach the conversation. And it was like a time that I wasn't used to having conversations. It wasn't like this early for me, but it was, a time I wasn't used to having conversations. I had been out smoking weed with my friends beforehand, and I just wasn't I wasn't ready for it. And I did okay, but he certainly was able to come out of it saying that, oh, look, this guy didn't know what he was talking about, and like that kind of stuff. And it's hard when you do that with somebody who's really good at just kind of talking over people and talking forever. So before we get out of here, I want to, and we're not even going to talk. Well, I'm trying to decide. There's two things I want to ask you. Do you think Brett's 15 minutes of fame are about up?
The answer is I would like to say yes, but I think he's digging into the proper anti-vax community and conspiracy communities, not like, playing on the fringes. Like he's going right in, and I think if he does that correctly, then he can be like a permanent fixture, like correctly, like if he establishes himself like David Icke. So because the one thing that he's very good of, him and Heller, and I would give them complete credit for this, they're very good at sounding like they're legitimate, careful people. Right, like if you break down what they're saying, it's obvious they're egomaniacal idiots. But like the tone and the way it sounds like reasonable, careful, scientific. And there are very few people in the conspiracy space who do that as well as he does.
So I had a guy named Alex from the Q Origins project on, and I kind of brought that up, and he called that academic window dressing.
Yeah. Matt and I have called it like academic cosplay.
Yeah.
Like it's exactly that. And they're top tier at it from my perspective, right? Like as an academic, I think when I'm listening to them, sometimes they're like, well, they sound reasonable.
Yeah, I don't know if you were able to check it out last night for the Intellectual Dollar Tree, which I have to put out later today. I hate that part of doing this, the part where you have to actually put the podcast out. I like the streaming part. I like the interaction with the community part. But he talked to Constantine from Trigonometry recently. No, I was stunned. I thought that they were going to go in there in glad hand, but I think like Constantine like broke up with him. Like I think he like kind of jettisoned him. I think that he kind of was like, I don't want to be your friend anymore, was the vibe I got from it.
I listened to the start of that and I heard Constantine offering like an unusual level of pushback for the IDW set, but he was still, I mean, like Constantine is still an IDW guy through and through. So he's just like, he's not willing to like agree with Brett's madness so much, but he's like, when I heard him talking about the ivermectin stuff, he just would go so far as to say, I can't judge the evidence, so I won't take a position on that. But he wasn't saying like, Brett, you're being like an insane fool. Or like,
right. Well, he's not going to do that, right? Because it's just maybe, that's not what they do there. But I was stunned. I thought it was going to be glad handy, and he kept it. I felt like kind of bad for Constantine by the end of it. If you listen to the whole thing, because he just kept saying to Brett, he's like, "These are things I'm not an expert in. I don't want to be a player in this public health stuff anymore." I did
see that, and I was kind of like, I was glad for that. Like, I think the trigonometry guys, there's a ton to criticize.
My chat calls the other guy non-Oliver.
yeah, I can kind of see that. But yeah, I credit to Constantine. When I did hear that, I was like, that's amazing, because I never hear that in that space. Someone saying like, except for Eric Weinstein, and in that case, he just wants to like not directly take a position, right? Like he's just always constantly trying to play the angles to say both things simultaneously. But yeah, so that's but I sadly don't think Brett is going anywhere. I think his moment of like mainstream credibility is shrinking,
right?
But he's digging into the like, the proper conspiracy community, and that's probably a better place for him.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think maybe you're right. And maybe the question was wrong. Yeah. But I think like a lot of his former IDW friends are sort of starting to jump ship on him.
Yeah, but like,
it was surprising that Constantine of all people it appeared to me that he was jumping ship on him. And I was like, that was surprising, very surprising. Because I think that those people, there's a group of people I call the IDW kind of hangers on. It includes like Constantine and non-Oliver. I don't even know that guy's name. Also,
what about Shermer?
Do you think Shermer's a hanger on?
Well, like Shermer interviewed Brett right after.
Oh, and he didn't say shit about vaccines.
Exactly,
nothing.
And that to me is a example that like of the kind of like cowardice of in that sphere. Like Shermer, for everything he knows what anti-vax stuff is, and he just didn't mention anything.
You talk a lot about tribalism, and it's because it's tribalism there.
But so
like
Brett
because like RFK Jr. is of the out group to Michael Shermer, so he would be probably perfectly happy to go after RFK Jr. because he's been in this person's out group for a long time. But Brett's been in his in group, and that's so he isn't going to do it. And if tribalism is as much about knowing who the out group is as who your in group is.
Yeah. So that's like my counter question to you is, and I'm interested what you think, Dave, is like so Shermer, like if Brett is on the out, right? Sam Harris has disowned them, various other people, even Constantine is like saying,
I was actually really impressed with Constantine. I went into that, like, we've been making fun of those guys for such a long time, and I was blown away. I was like really impressed.
Gonna have to
he made a lot of sense.
End of it. But then, so do you think now, for example, that Shermer wouldn't do that again? Like, is Constantine better than Shermer, or is it just the timing? Like that Shermer's going to cut him as well?
I think at the beginning of that interview, you remember they had talked about Constantine having a kid. And I think they were talking about how that changes you. And I think that may be playing something into it, or Constantine would like to stop maybe engaging in this kind of stuff that endangers his income, because he has more responsibility now. I don't know. I'm not, I try not to read people's minds too much, but it seems like that might be playing in, because I'm not thinking that Constantine's going to start having like liberal people on to talk or whatever. Like, he's still going to do culture war, but I think it's going to be just straight up culture war from here on out for him.
Yeah, not anti-vax stuff.
And I don't know about Shermer. I used to actually kind of like Michael Shermer. He was this kind of weird libertarian guy who liked to ride his bike and like made fun of Deepak Chopra. But then like some stuff came out, and he handled it in a I'm running to the Gamergate people kind of way, which I thought was a very poor decision. But I don't know if Shermer. I mean, I think Shermer's on going to be on his way out as a public figure. I think he's made his money and he's kind of getting out. I'm seeing less and less of him, and he has less and less sort of skeptic cred as he talks to more and more fringe people and never questions them about their fringe beliefs. Like, if you remember the incident where he spoke with Stefan Molyneux and had no idea that basically Stefan Molyneux was a fucking cult leader.
Yeah.
Or claimed to have no idea about these things after the fact, which I think there's no way you could, there's no way you could.
I don't know. I think a lot of those guys, like the same with Sam, like, Sam still hasn't read the Christchurch shooter manifesto, right? But he's talked about it multiple times, and you would just think, if you were going to be...
It was so hard to get through that, but like, I read it. It was rough, like, reading it.
Yeah, but it's like, it's 90, that manifesto is 90 pages long, right? And like, you get through it in an hour, and you don't need to read the whole thing. You get the gist, right? Spend 20 minutes and you get the gist of what that's about. It's not hard, right? It's not subtle subtext, what he's about. And like, that's the, I mean, I know, Dave, you want to wrap up, but that's like one of the things that I find annoying about this space is like, especially on that side, the IDW side, how often they talk about topics and how little research they put into the actual thing, right? Like, if you want to talk about immigration and like, the Muslim immigration, stuff like that, then spend time to talk like to actual experts, not the culture war people, not, Andrew Sullivan's new book. Like, go speak to people who cover like what the immigration restrictions are in the US, and like they are not these like lax things where they just let anyone in. It's the opposite. So yeah,
right. It's highly restrictive. I think the problem is that and I think we all do this to some extent. We all get kind of married to certain narratives about the world, and it's like hard to give them up. And I think that if I'm married to narratives, you're married to narratives, everybody's married to certain narratives. And I think one of the good things, like, there's a lot of negative things about like me, like live streaming and having people chatting and stuff. But like one of the positive things has been like, where I get things wrong, people are just like they're just like, Dave. The chat's just full of my name. Right. And it's like a check. It's like a check on me. And I think that a lot of people in the space we're talking about, just those people, the top of the funnel sort of ejects the people that would be challenging the gurus. Why would you challenge the guru?
Yeah, there's another time we can talk about this, but like the whole parasocial dynamics, and like I've been paying a bit more attention to like Twitch and live streamers, nothing to do with the culture war, like mostly like just I'm interested kind of anthropologically on VTubers and this whole thing, right? But I hadn't considered the aspect that like you're talking about, because the chat box is just like as
on a good night,
never ending stream. Yeah, for like these super popular people at least. But what I mean is, I saw that as like a reinforcement bubble in a way, right? But like you're right that like depending on the audience you cultivate, that could also be a thing that calls you out, right?
Right. Well, we've cultivated an audience of cynics, like a lot of Gen X. Like Twitch trends pretty hard, like young man, and we've got a lot of women in my age cohort in our community on Twitch, which is real surprising. Although, you know, that's a limited pool, but that just seems to, like, on Twitch, it's a limited pool at least. And it seems to be like we've been able to appeal to like more women, more queer people, more people over 30. And we went there assuming we were going to be counter programming against like young kind of MRA types. That never happened. We ended up just attracting basically people in our own age cohort who are cynical like us. So
that's cool.
There's a million other things like, you know, we could talk about, but yeah, I think we've kind of gone a little longer than I like to go. I think like people get kind of tired of listening to long stuff. I'm not tired of talking to you, but that's a different story.
No, I don't.
You need to go to bed too. Before we get out of here, once again, like where can people find you, and where can people find your podcast?
Decoding the Gurus is like just, you know, on podcasty things, and we have Twitter and that kind of thing, and me, that's like the place that people want to see me. Nobody cares about my academic work, so but that exists. It does exist. So the podcast is Decoding the Gurus, where we have very indulgent conversations about gurus. So I'm sorry about that, Dave, but that's the nature of the beast. I'm going to blame it on like Irish people and the gift of the gab. That's the reason. It's my culture's fault.
Well, good. It was good to finally digitally meet you or whatever, and well, hopefully we can talk again. Maybe not too soon, but relatively soon. And I hope you guys either do L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige on your show. I would be handing out USB drives of that to people walking down the street if you did that. Thanks again, Chris.
Cheers.
So the discussion continued on for a little while after this. We talked about sense making and our favorite sense maker. You can go ahead and get that at patreon.com/Echoplex. Patrons at any level get the entire audio capture of all of our podcast recording sessions all summer long. And if you can't pay or don't want to pay, we never really paywall this stuff. Just DM me or email us or something, and I'll get you the file.